Hello everyone. So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario in which Benito Mussolini comes to power in present-day Italy. For those who don't know, Italy just elected the most right-wing government it's had into power since 1945. And from the outside looking in, it looks like many of these right-wing politicians have been heavily influenced by Mussolini's politics. Now, being right-wing doesn't automatically mean you're a fascist. But for this scenario, we're going to take that extra leap and say that this new right-wing leader is Mussolini reincarnated, and they are very popular. With that said, I do want to say that I don't think any of this scenario is remotely possible, and this is purely for fun, so let's not try to get offended. I also want to take a quick second to ask you to like and comment on the video, as well as subscribe to the channel. That's how I know that you like what I'm doing and want to see more, so please let me know. So, let's get the scenario rolling. So first off, we need to give this new Mussolini some breathing room, and we're going to eliminate all major alliances such as NATO and the European Union. And lastly, we're going to progress the scenario about 2 to 3 years at the start. This is to allow the new Italian government to become more stable, and so the Italian military has some time to become more competent with more training, equipment, and manpower. So in this scenario, Italy, its allies, and any of its client states or puppets are all going to be represented by the color red. This is just to make it easier so that we can all keep up with what is going on. So the last 2 to 3 years, Italy's been flexing its economic and diplomatic muscles in the region. This has resulted in the Italian people becoming very prosperous and liking their new government a lot. Peoples in other nations around the Adriatic kind of see this, and they start wishing for the same thing. One of those nations is that of the Republic of San Marino right here. Now, San Marino is a completely landlocked and Italy-locked country here in Italy. It does not touch the Adriatic or anything else, and their people realize that their micronation status really doesn't make sense, and if they were to join Italy, they'll probably prosper just the same as the rest of Italy has. So they all petition their government to hold a referendum. The government of San Marino begrudgingly agrees to this. A referendum comes back, and over 80% of the people of San Marino want to join Italy instead of maintain their independence. Once that referendum result has been reached, a petition is put forward to Italy by San Marino, and Italy agrees, in which they annex San Marino, and San Marino is no more. Italian companies and the Italian government have been quietly buying controlling interest in many key industries around the region, and this is most apparent in Albania. Now, at this time, Albania is controlled by a left-wing socialist government, and Italy knows that if it's going to continue to have sway over Albania, it's got to get that left-wing government out of power. Now, in order to get that left-wing government out of power in Albania, Italy causes a minor recession via its controlling interest in all those companies in Albania. The people vote in the next election in favor of a right-wing government that is pro-Italy, and since it's pro-Italy and right-wing, and Italy has so much controlling power over all these companies, it's pretty much a puppet of Italy at this point, so we'll go ahead and add it to Italy's corner. So the new government in Italy knows that in order for it to become a major player on the world stage, it needs to be in control of its own energy resources. Primarily, it needs oil, and that's mostly found down here in Libya. So in order to ensure a successful invasion of Libya, Italy realizes that it can't go through what it did in World War II, which is where they let Malta become an open sore in their supply lines. So after a short period of training in Sicily, Italy takes an airborne unit and lands it in Malta. They brush aside any resistance, and the Maltese are actually pretty happy with this new arrangement because it brings a lot of new investment to the island. And of course, because the Italian people have been so prosperous, they see this as a way for them to become even richer. So they gladly take this on. So the last several years, a third Libyan civil war has broken out after nothing could be achieved at the end of the second Libyan civil war. This is a four-way civil war, and there are four major sides. In the west and in the central, this is the Tripoli government, which really doesn't have anybody backing it. In the east is a Benghazi government, which is backed by Egypt and Tunisia. Down here in yellow in the south is the Tuareg groups. They're basically tribal leaders. And then here in the north in gray is the Islamic State. So when Italy first comes into this conflict, it starts by attacking the Islamic State around Misrata and completely cutting off that city. This obviously is something that all sides really kind of like because nobody really likes the Islamic State, and the world kind of champions Italy for getting involved. Italy goes ahead and forms a rapid push after cutting off Misrata and taking Sirte right here in the center, and after that, that pretty much collapses all of the rest of of the Islamic State territory here. Following its takeover of the Islamic State's territory in the north here, it then begins an attack against the Tripoli government to kind of cut off Tripoli from the rest of Libya here. This is a huge salient that is slowly being beaten back. At the same time, the Italians work their way down to the Tuareg because if they can get down here, they know that they can begin working with the Tuareg a little bit, because all they really want is just to pump oil in this region. They get down there, they start working out deals and such, and the Tuareg decide that they're not going to attack the Italians, which is also the benefit of Italy. As Tripoli begins to fall and finally does fall, Italy then gains control over the rest of the Tripoli government's areas. This is all mostly desert down here, all the real population's up here, so that's why you're not seeing many differences down here. So during this time, the Italian government is actually working deals with not only just the Tuareg, but all the other warlords and such like that, because if they can get these guys on their side, they know that they can control the area. Contrary to popular belief, a strong government in Libya is very hard to achieve, and you kind of have to have like all the tribal leaders on your side in order to really maintain power. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter what you have in the form of military and all that, you're going to have a really hard time. So Italy starts getting all these guys on their side, basically just paying them off and promising them things. They start to do some of the same over here in this other region, where they end up taking like other little pockets and territories. This ends up giving them more territory than what they really started with, and this really starts to kind of tick off the Benghazi and Eastern groups. Italy finally says that that's enough, we're ready to attack. So Italy begins a push up towards Benghazi. Now, because Egypt and Tunisia are friendly to this government over here in Benghazi, they both decide to join the war on behalf of the Eastern Libyan group, and they quickly take out these tiny little towns that they did take over from these other warlords, and they start pushing the Italians back and away from Benghazi a little bit. But Italy's main goal has not been to go after Benghazi, it's actually to go ahead and knock Tunisia out of this war. So they begin pushing up the coastline, and they eventually come up and take Sfax up here. They then use that to opportunity with the Tunisians held up to go ahead and get more of this territory. In the east, the Egyptians push back all the way to about halfway to Sirte over here, while the Italians push all the way up and take Tunis and basically all of what they called Carthage. Tunisia then falls, and after a huge battle to the east of Sirte, Italians win, and they begin pushing back the Egyptian forces as well as the East Libyans. They push all the way up and take Benghazi. Then they begin taking over the rest of Libya along the coast. They encircle Tobruk and use that to knock out a large Egyptian and Libyan force. With the coastline taken, they technically own all of Libya at that point, and the Italians begin pushing into Egypt. They are stopped at the port town of Mazar Mutra right here, and in order to get around it, they make a landing at El Alamein. This cuts off the supplies coming in from Alexandria, and they then begin pushing back on the forces at Mazar Mutra. They then encircle it, and this is the majority of the Egyptian army here. All they have to do is take it. They eventually give up in Mazar Mutra, and Italy begins pushing towards Alexandria, which they take. They push all the way over to Port Said, which is the northern terminus of the Suez Canal, and they then take over all of the Suez Canal. It is then a slow process as they take Cairo and start working their way down the Nile. The Egyptian government then flees to the south, but eventually they are captured. With no real resistance left to stop them, the Italians capitulate Egypt, and they've now taken what they couldn't get in World War II. In the peace deal, Italy creates two client states. The first one is a mashup of Tunisia and Libya into Tripolitania. To make this work, they've granted a lot of local autonomy to local tribes and local lords to basically tell them that they're allowed to do kind of like they wish in this area so long as they abide by Italian law. This is going to work out really well for Italy. They've learned when they were holding Libya the first time that this holding the tribes in your hand works for them. On the other end of the spectrum, they've turned a new client state out of this as well. They're giving them a lot of autonomy, but the world really had an issue with Italy taking over the Suez Canal area. So what Italy has decided to do to appease everybody is that they have split off the Sinai portion from the western bank of the Nile into the Sinai, has become a UN protectorate zone. And this is basically just to assure everybody that Italy does not want to stop traffic throughout the zone. So it's headed up by Port Said in the north, and the UN controls all this. Meanwhile, Italy has a client government here here in Egypt. Now that Italy controls everything from pretty much the Suez through the central Mediterranean, the entire region is feeling Italy's dominance. The next big event is where Albania decides that it wants to expand its borders some. Now, they have Italy's full backing to do whatever they want in the Balkans. And the first thing they do is they invade Montenegro. And the second that Albania declares war on Montenegro, Kosovo decides to join in as well on behalf of Montenegro, so they can maybe try to keep Albania held back. Of course, they don't know that Italy is basically pulling the strings here. So Italy says that, oh no, their puppet is being attacked. So they begin sending troops over to come handle this. And this war is pretty much just a cakewalk for Italy and Albania. They quickly take Pristina and Kosovo falls. They then begin pushing in from the border of Albania and Kosovo to try to break off any support that the Montenegrins might have. They then come around, knock everything out, and then come back for the capital. And both nations capitulate. In the peace deal, Albania gets both Kosovo's and Montenegro's lands and basically makes this weird Mickey Mouse looking shape here in the Balkans. Now that Italy backed Albania's claims and actually took part in these invasions of Kosovo and Montenegro, the rest of the Balkans are now very scared of Italy. So they all decide they're going to form their own alliances and pacts. In the West, we have the Dalmatian League, which is Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. In the East, we have the Balkan Pact, which is made up of Serbia, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria. This angers Italy greatly, and they demand that these alliances be broken apart. Of course, all these nations say that they're not going to do that because it's for their own security, and with their refusal, Italy decides they're going to declare war. So Italy first declares war on Slovenia, which brings in the rest of the Dalmatian League on their side. The Italians first press in for Ljubljana and also for Rijeka down here. They take the both, and then they make sure they secure up areas along the border. Meanwhile, units from Bosnia began to invade into the new Albania. With Ljubljana already taken, the Italian forces then head for Zagreb. When they reach there, they realize that they pretty much extended their supply lines too much, and they decide to start taking over more of Slovenia to knock it out. Slovenia falls, and the Italian forces begin trying to secure all the Adriatic coastline. With Zagreb gone, they then begin pushing throughout the rest of Croatia. They enter Split and begin to enter in Bosnia. Bosnian forces begin to pull out of the new Albania. The new Albanian troops go on to begin pushing into Bosnia. Knowing that they're next, the Balkan Pact then it decides to declare war on Italy as well. They launch an attack into the old Kosovo regions of Albania, which they quickly take. They also begin taking the southern areas as well. Italy commits a lot more forces to this and begins pressing back on all fronts. They quickly knock out the rest of Croatia and begin making a push to secure Sarajevo. Albanian troops are told to hold the line in Bosnia and start taking as much as they can back of their own nation. A major offensive is made and takes Sarajevo, which forces the end of the Dalmatian League. Italian troops now enter Serbia, taking south of the Danube. They approach Belgrade, but they're unable to take it, so they begin trying to cut it off. They take everything north of the Danube and help cut off Belgrade here in the center. This causes much of Serbia in the south to actually start to fall apart. Albanian forces enter the eastern side of North Macedonia. Albanian forces retake the areas that were previously taken from them, and they push into Skopje. Italian forces take over southern Siberia, but they're halted by Bulgarian forces just before they get into Bulgaria. The Bulgarians try to make an attempt to take Belgrade and alleviate the defense, but Italy pushes them back and takes over Belgrade. Fences in Serbia start to collapse, as well as down in Macedonia. Bulgaria cannot hold this front alone. The Italians push into Bulgaria for the first time and take Vidin. The Italians also take Nice. They begin pushing further into Bulgaria. They start taking the northern border. The Albanians, on the other hand, finish up with northern Macedonia and start pushing into southern Bulgaria. Both forces begin working together to try to cut off all of Sofia from the rest of the country. They were successful, and of course, the combined force of the Italians and the Albanians begin to push into the eastern half of Bulgaria, taking much of the countryside. Bulgarians do try to push out and expand their pockets some, but they're quickly beaten, and Sofia then falls. The Bulgarians fall back to Varna, where they're hoping to continue their defense, but the Italian forces are too strong. They then make it to the Black Sea, where they then take over Varna and complete their conquest of the Balkans. As the Balkan alliances push for peace, we're then left with this new peace deal. Italy is going to get Slovenia, as well as all the Adriatic coast to Albania. The rest of Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, and Bulgaria are turned to client states. Albania gets a little bit here of North Macedonia, and North Macedonia is turned into a client state. Italy then begins a reconstruction scheme across the Balkans to rebuild the infrastructure and set up new manufacturing so that the people here aren't idle. The Italian government also encourages Italians to move to all these puppet nations so that they can begin to Italianize key areas of these countries. And with its current European ambitions fulfilled, Italy then turns back to Africa. So Italy's ambitions in Africa extend not just along the Mediterranean, but also all the way down into Eastern Africa. Now, to take portions of East Africa, Italy knows that it's going to have to rely on its client state of Egypt to help with a lot of this. So the first thing it does is identifies a target that Egypt actually might like to help take down, and that's here in Sudan. So for the past several years, Sudan's government has been controlling it with an iron fist, and the country is almost on the brink of collapse as the people are rising up and bankruptcy is becoming very real. So the Italians and the Egyptians decide to launch themselves into that. They declare war on Sudan, and they begin their conquest by following the Nile River down to Dongola. Following the capture of Dongola, the Egyptian and Italian forces then push on to Khartoum, which they take fairly easily. They then begin a push over towards Port Sudan so that they can resupply their forces before then moving into the rest of the country. They take Kassala, then they go towards El Obeid, and at this point they pretty much own all of the major portions of Sudan, and Sudan then falls. In the peace deal, Italy gives all of Sudan to Egypt so long as Egypt promises to respect the tribes, especially the Ganjawi down here in Darfur, as well as giving Egypt a little bit more autonomy than they had before. With Sudan out of the way, Italy then declares war on Eritrea. In launching from Sudan, they quickly start taking over Eritrea. Asmara falls, and then the rest of the country falls with it. In the peace deal, Italy takes all of Eritrea for itself. Italy then declares war on both Djibouti and Somalia. And despite fighting really hard, the Djiboutians fall pretty quickly and their capital is taken. The Italians then push into Somaliland, where the people pretty much just greet them openly. Somalia itself then begins to fall, but then a front line is started to be held by the Somalis right here. And behind them, they're hitting it with guerrillas, so it makes it really hard for the Italians to push any further. So instead of letting themselves bleed dry in the deserts of Somalia, the Italians then make a naval invasion and cut off Mogadishu. This sends the Somali warlords into complete disarray, and the Italians push forward, link up, take Mogadishu, and all of Somalia falls. As Mogadishu falls, Italy then sets up the East Italian Administration region, which is comprised of the client states of Eritrea, Djibouti, Somaliland, which has been broken free of Somalia, and of course Somalia itself. So while Italy is investing in all these East African governments, they start pushing guns and ammunition into some very heated rebel groups in Ethiopia. The Tigray in the north, the Oromo, which pretty much own the central areas, as well as out here in the Ogaden. Their goal is very simple, and that is to make the Ethiopian military have to fight all of these civil conflicts at once, and it's very successful. Over several years, the Ethiopian government tires itself as it's fighting all of these little groups around Ethiopia. While that's going on, the infrastructure projects throughout East Africa are getting completed, and Italy is drawing up war plans to invade Ethiopia. At the right time, Italy declares war on Ethiopia, and the war begins. The first thing that the Italians do is they attack from Sudan and Eritrea and take over the Tigray region, as well as parts of the Afar region here in the north. They also come in from the Somaliland and Somalia regions so they can attack and take over the Ogaden. They then just kind of harass along the southern border, try to pull as many Ethiopian forces to the south as they can. And when they feel like they've done this enough, they stop and they begin pushing in from Sudan as well. An army of Oromo fighters decide to step up and start helping out the Italians. They conquer much of the south here, and Ethiopia finds itself completely cut off from everybody. Italian forces pushing from the north take Gondar up here, and then they push down and take the capital of Addis Ababa. The Ethiopian government relocates to Jima, and the Italian forces then go ahead and connect with the Ogaden front off in the east before mounting a major offensive and taking out Jima, and Ethiopia capitulates. With Ethiopia now capitulated, the Italians call for a Congress of the Horn of Africa to happen in Djibouti, where they will then determine what the future looks like for East Africa. During the Congress of the Horn of Africa, Italy is very hands-off in how the borders are actually drawn, so long as everybody submits to Italian power. Italy basically states that they are going to take care of all the infrastructure for these nations that get created. Also states that they're going to try to invest the best that they can and try to prop up all the peoples here. They just want something that's stable, and that's basically what comes out of this. You see a lot of different changes here. The major one is seeing that Djibouti, Somaliland, and Somalia each decide to to come together to create one nation of Somalia, and this takes over all of the Ogaden region as well. You see Eritrea get split into two, and it gets given a little bit of the southern region where Tigray is. It's a much more stronger, more ethnically homogenous region now. The Afar nation takes over the northern parts of Djibouti, as well as the eastern and southeastern areas of Eritrea. Also takes over the Afar region of Ethiopia while it's at it. The remainder of Ethiopia is split into two new nations, that of Amhara and Oromia. They create their own nations and own governments down here, while Italy and the Italian East African administration control the international matters of all these nations. Plus, surprisingly, these guys actually work together very well. Now that Italy has wrapped up its East African ambitions, it then sets its gaze back to Europe. So when all the Balkan states allied and joined in to try to stop Italy during the Balkan War, they forced Italy to temporarily set aside their true prize of Greece. And now Italy is prepared to take that region. So Italy moves a lot of its army to the border regions here in the Balkans in order to get Greece to look at this. And of course, Greece does see this, and because it's so open what Italy's doing, and they begin sending all their troops up to this region as well. Italy then decides that they're going to declare war then. Now, what Italy doesn't know is that Greece and France have signed a secret defensive agreement where if one of them gets attacked by anybody, that they'll come to each other's aid. So the Italian war declaration on Greece sets off this alliance agreement, and France joins in on the war. This stuns Italy as they weren't prepared to fight a two-front war, and they begin quickly shipping their troops back to the Alps to try to defend. The French see some early success here in the Alps, but they don't get pushing too far before they hit up on the Italian forts here in the region, and this kind of forms a stalemate there. In the meantime, the Italians activate their ruse. They put all these men on the border with Greece, hoping that Greece would move all their troops to that border as well, which of course they did. And the Greeks didn't leave any defenses on Crete, so the Italians go ahead and take that island from them, and this pretty much bottles up a lot of the Greek navy in the Aegean Sea. The recalled Italian units make it to the Alpine front, where they stop the French kind of where they were and push them back a little bit. Meanwhile, the Italian Marines make a landing at Kalamata on the Peloponnese Peninsula, and they push up and take Patras to the north, as well as reach Corinth. Greek troops are forced to pull back off of the Balkan front, which allows Italian troops to come in and cut off and take Thessaloniki. This then leads Thrace to fall. Forces in Albania push into Epirus, while Italian forces from Thrace push down into Thessaly. The Thrace and Thessaly fronts continue to push down the Greek peninsula until they reach Delphi. There, a ginormous battle is held with the remaining Greek forces, which are then beaten. They then push on and take Athens, and Greece falls. Meanwhile, back in the Alps, the French and the Italians have been fighting a back and forth battle for control of the Alps, with neither gaining much ground. In a bold move, the Italian Air Force severely cripples the French Navy in the Gulf of Lions, and Italy gains naval supremacy throughout the Mediterranean. Italy uses this to take over Corsica, and then they go on and navally invade at Toulon. From Toulon, they also take over Marseille, and this causes a large amount of the French forces to fall back. As French forces fall back, the Italians retake their land. The Italians then come out of the Alps and help encircle the French army in around Nice. Seeing the writing on the wall, the French capitulate to Italy and negotiate for peace terms. In the peace deal, Italy agrees to return to its Alpine borders and pay France a considerable sum of money for France to recognize that Greece is a part of Italy, as well as for Corsica to be given to Italy. Greece is turned into a client state, and Italy formally takes over Crete and all the Aegean islands. And that concludes my scenario on if Mussolini returned today. As you can see, Italy's influence grew tremendously during this. They have an empire that ranges from the Alps throughout all the Mediterranean, the Balkans, Greece, Tripoli and Tunisia, Egypt, all the way down the Nile into Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. And they've done really well doing this. They are very prosperous, but of course, eventually all things must end. I can see a lot of these little nations breaking apart on their own. The most economical and probably the best change out of this entire map is what's happened in the Horn. I can still see that like Sudan and Egypt will probably break apart one day, and we'll probably see more like Darfur as well, Tunisia and Libya, with Libya breaking apart into several different nations based off all the little tribal groups. And of course, the Balkans are not going to be easy to keep your thumb on either. Greece as well. So this whole scenario has resulted in a ticking time bomb for Italy that will eventually come to an end. But that's not for this video. And guys, I want to say that I appreciate you all so much for watching. I hope that you've subscribed, you like the video, you comment, tell me where you think this is completely unreasonable, because I definitely don't think it's reasonable at all myself. And I look forward to hearing from you. So guys, I appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time.